Well, welcome to part 2 of How to Keep the Sabbath, Do's and Don'ts. I'm Les Miller. As I was doing the editing for part 1, I came to realize the way things have worked out with the script, it seems like most of the don'ts, as far as the do's and don'ts of Sabbath keeping, have been in part 1, and the focus has been mostly on preparing for the Sabbath. Part 2's focus is going to be more, I hope, on the do's, the positive sides, and on the Sabbath itself, as we see the video play out. There's one particular Bible verse, though, that I just was not sure exactly where to put it. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 7. I just got it here on the picnic table. Go eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already accepted your works. I am not going to debate anybody right here, right now, as to whether he means alcoholic wine here, or whether wine was just an old English word in King James that was translated that way that should have been grape juice. What I want to focus on there is God has accepted your works. That's very, very important. People who get too caught up and too worried about, oh, should I do this or that on the Sabbath? Should I do this or that as I get ready for the Sabbath? That's not the point. It's righteousness by faith. The Sabbath is part of righteousness by faith. So it's a day for God, it's not a day for yourself. You get too focused on the do's and don'ts, you're focusing on yourself. And as I said in the original Bible study video that I did years ago on the Les Millman channel, focus on Jesus, He'll guide you through the do's and don'ts. So let's let that be the focus today as we continue with the video that I recorded at the house. Luke 6 verses 9 and 10 tell us that acts of goodness and mercy are in keeping with the spirit of the true Sabbath. Then Jesus said to them, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy? And when he had looked around at them all, he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. So I said Exodus bans us from doing regular jobs. Well, there's some exceptions you can make to that. Police, fire, medical, first responders, that's a great idea for an exception. There's probably others, but that's what comes to my mind the most. I've seen Seventh-day Adventist churches do food bank drives on Sabbath afternoons. And therefore, helping others, community service. If it snows here, I'm Canadian. If it snows on the Sabbath, I'm going to shovel my walk because I don't want anybody to slip on any ice hidden under that snow. And there are some things that do need to be done. And therefore, those things are okay. But it's not something we should try to push the envelope on either. I actually remember once a Seventh-day Adventist church right here in this area went out and painted the fence for a lady who was a low-income senior. They did it on a Sabbath, and as much of a nice thing as that is, and I'm thankful for the fact that they were willing to help her, I'll be honest with you, I have more than 30 years in the painting business. I've painted apartments, I've painted fancy show homes out on acreages. I've painted industrial equipment for oil and gas processing. There's no such thing as a paint emergency. But I find in general, Seventh-day Adventists, we don't normally police each other. We pray for each other. We are big, very big on freedom of conscience. Emergencies do happen. So emergencies are things you can't control. That's Matthew 12, 11 and 12. Then he said to them, what man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep. Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. So, if your child vomits on the floor 10 minutes after sundown and you just finished vacuuming, or if it's your pet that vomits on the floor, it's okay to clean it up. Don't sit there and say, oh, I've got to wait and let this stain permanently ruin my carpet because I want to serve God. That's just going too far. So, no work on Sabbath. We've covered that from Exodus and a few other verses we've looked up here. What about no business? No spending of money on regular life transactions. That is in Nehemiah chapter 13. It's a rather lengthy passage. It starts at verse 15, goes to 22. I'm just going to read you verses 19 to 22. So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to be dark before the Sabbath, that I commanded the gates to be shut, and charged that they must not be opened till after the Sabbath. Then I posted some of my servants at the gates, so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Now the merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. Then I warned them and said to them, why do you spend the night round the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time on they came no more on the Sabbath, and I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, and that they should go and guard the gates, to sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of your mercy. So we just covered emergencies from Matthew, which means if you have a medical condition and you need a prescription, yes, it's okay to go get that prescription on the Sabbath if you have to start that drug treatment right away. Nothing wrong with that. But in general, shopping, it can wait, just like housework can wait. Thinking about how Jesus took the Sermon on the Mount and used it to show the true depth of spirituality of the Ten Commandments by relating it to the heart issue and the born-again experience, we see similar relations there. Physically locking the gates of the city and posting guards. The message for us today: make your heart a fortress. Make your home a fortress. Don't let the evil, sinful world in. So myself, I try hard to avoid watching the news on the Sabbath. And secular TV shows, well, there's certain things that you just don't want to watch. You want to keep it a spiritual tone as best you can. Maybe you're the type of person that sermon after sermon after sermon is just going to say, my brain is full, I can't take it. I need to spend some time to take it in. So maybe some nature documentaries, or, one thing that my wife and I did for many, many years. After church, we would go over to her mother's house. And after lunch, we would play Bible-based board games on Sabbath afternoon. That was always fun. And that was always nice to get some visiting time in, too. But we see freedom of conscience here also, because Nehemiah didn't go to Tyre and tell them they had to do things the same way. Just like Joshua said, as for me and my house, we were going to serve the Lord, Nehemiah was saying his people, this is how we are going to do it. He was not going to force anybody else to do things the same way. He wasn't going to buy or sell. They weren't going to buy or sell. Interesting, the tie into Revelation, what's going to happen at the end. Those who want to put the mark of the beast on the world, they're going to say, you can't buy or sell. It's not something I'm going to cover much in this video, but there's a lot of references to the fact that worship is really what it's all about. Not a one world government coming, a one world religion that's a false religion. That's what the New World Order is really going to be. I can put some links in the description if you want to hear some videos from other Adventist speakers on the mark of the beast. And I'll just leave it at that for now. Sometimes I took it too far myself when I was a new Adventist. Sometimes when you're new in the faith, you go overboard because you just want to love Jesus so much, you try to find every single way that you can serve him, and then you get nitpicky like the Jews did in the first century. I wouldn't go to any of my family's social events on Sabbath, and including the kids' birthday parties. And I made my family host all their social events on Sundays, even though I was the only Adventist. Years later, my grandmother told me there was another Adventist cousin she had when she was younger who would come on a Sabbath afternoon to her house to visit. And she thought I was being rude. She thought I was being very hurtful to her and the family. And it was a big sore point between us. I was glad to have a chance to work it out. And there was one time I actually did go on a Friday night to a non-Adventist family friend to their Christmas Eve open house. And at the time I thought, you know what, I'm sinning by doing this. I shouldn't be here associating with these worldly people. But I got some great witnessing opportunities. This discussion here that I'm talking about, it's really one of the great conflicts that every believer has, because we're not called to hide from the world. We're called to bring the love of God to the world, and yet we're also called to prevent the sins of the world from defiling us. How are we supposed to strike this delicate balance? I came across a great statement once. I believe the way it was worded was, we should only associate with them as much as we can do them good. You can apply that to your whole life, but you can apply it also to your thoughts about just exactly what to do or not do in the way of associating with worldly people on the Sabbath. You've got to pray about these things. You've got to ask the Lord to help you apply these lessons to your life. I can't give you an absolute, perfect, clear definition for every single time you have to face any one individual situation. One of the best parts of this passage in Nehemiah is the way it ends. He said, remember me. In other words, he's asking for grace. This is a tie-in between Sabbath keeping and salvation by practical faith. Remember also, it's those who live for money, it's those who live for themselves, who have no interest in God or spiritual things, who find the Sabbath a burden. That's Amos chapter 8, verses 4 to 6. Hear this, you who swallow up the needy and make the poor of the land fail, saying, when will the new moon be passed, that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath, that we may trade wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel large, falsifying the scales by deceit, that we may buy the poor for silver, and the needy for a pair of sandals, even sell the bad wheat. I spent 10 years doing commercial and residential painting. I worked for probably 25 different companies, sometimes just for a day or a week. Either I didn't like that person or that person didn't like me. The longest I lasted in any one place was 3.5 years. And sometimes it was just, Les, we've got no work. We'll have to lay you off. Well, hopefully we can get you back in the spring. If not, well, thank you very much for your service. And there were some guys that I worked for who were like this Amos verse talks about, who just went, go, 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 7 days a week. You got to get it while it's there, And people like that, they have no interest in spiritual things. They have no interest in supporting anybody who has an interest in spiritual things. I remember in that company that I worked for those 3.5 years, one very early time working there, it wasn't the boss. He was a nice boss. He was willing to give me Sabbath off. It was the other guys who were jealous, who wanted me to work like them. On one side, they'd be proud to work overtime because they made all this money. On the other side, overtime was a burden because it cut into their free time. And they wanted me to feel the same way. And it finally stopped when I plainly and clearly said to them, God is more important than you are. You have to take that attitude into your job. And if you are applying for a new job, you have to tell them right away, I keep the seventh-day Sabbath. Don't hide it and then spring it on them later. That is just not right. They have to know ahead of time. And then if they don't want to hire you, you're better off not working for them anyway. But in the same token, you have to be willing to make up for the lost time by working Sundays and holiday Mondays if they ask you. And when I was younger, in my 20s and 30s, I worked a lot of 6-day weeks. Now, some scholars might debate this, but it's possible. All I'll say is it's possible the Battle of Jericho was fought on a Sabbath. We don't fight literal wars today. Christians are supposed to be above politics. True Christians, in the end, will have an international focus. That's what the Seventh-day Adventist Church is all about, an international church with an international focus. So what's the modern equivalent? Spiritual warfare, missionary outreach work. I've done lots of knocking on doors on Sabbath, and as I've said, now I do a lot of typing in the morning on Sabbath before church, making posts, trying to win people. Now, if you've seen some of my other Bible videos, you'll know sometimes I give my audience what I call a homework assignment. For homework, read the entire 58th chapter of Isaiah, please. It gives a wonderful tie-in between practical Christian faith and Sabbath keeping. I'll just give you verse 13 of Isaiah 58. If you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words. This verse and this whole chapter tie in beautifully with what's in Amos as basically an opposite. You've got people there who live for money, and now you have people here who live for God, and they show it by calling the Sabbath a delight. What can you do to make it happy? My wife, when she was a child, she knew one pastor couple. The pastor's wife every Friday would make cream puffs. And that was their Friday night treat, was cream puffs. Can you do something like that? A special dessert for Sabbath? Let's key in on not finding your own ways or your own pleasure. What if you have a hobby like stamp collecting, model railroading, furniture finishing? There's nothing harmful in it. There's nothing sinful in it. You're an artist. You don't make pornographic art. Well, ask yourself this. Is it really spiritual? A generic hobby? Go ahead, do it on your other day off. But it's not spiritual. So, I don't know. Think about it. Now, as for sports, it's interesting. There's only one verse in the Bible that talks about sports. In 1 Corinthians 9:25, he doesn't say it's wrong, but notice there's a comparison there. They are trying to win a perishable crown. We are trying to win an imperishable crown. So two different people. One who's into sports, who is not a believer, and one who is a believer who has found something better than sports. So I'll leave you with that thought and leave you again to prayerfully cross-reference it with Isaiah 58 and decide how much or how little watching or playing sports you think you should do on the Sabbath. Daniel chapter 4 is one of the most interesting parts of the Bible because it's written by King Nebuchadnezzar. It's the story of his conversion experience. And when he comes to admit that the God of heaven is the one who put him on the throne, and that the God of heaven is the one on the true throne in heaven, one of the things Nehemiah states is that all of God's works are truth. So therefore, since God created the world, and that is his work of creation is truth, it is perfectly fine to go out for a nature walk on Sabbath. So I know that a lot of worldly people do like to use nature as an excuse to deny God. They never go out to church, and they always go out to the mountains instead. That's not what I'm talking about. Take God with you on that nature walk, and you'll find him in nature. Don't take God with you, and all you'll see is that rocks prove evolution. Taking freedom of conscience in mind, I'll tell you a story which I just think is hilarious. It actually happened sometime in Africa. I don't know if it was the 1980s or the 70s, but some missionaries, Adventist missionaries, after church, they're out to go out on a hike, and then one of the church members comes by It's a beach and he's in scuba gear. And they're trying to politely ask him, is this Sabbath appropriate? You put on all this scuba gear. He says, what are you doing? And they said, we're going bird watching. And he said, well, I'm going fish watching. Fish watching. That's how he describes scuba diving. So freedom of conscience. Again, apply this to your life. I am not here to police you. Not in any way. In Acts 17, verse 30, Paul said that God was winking at the sins of the Greeks, the sins of the rest of the world who practiced idol worship, but now was commanding them to repent. In Acts 18, Apollos comes on the scene for the first time, and all he knows is the baptism of John. And then Priscilla and Aquila take him aside, politely, calmly, lovingly explain to him the way of God more perfectly. I hope, by the grace of God, that the videos I make are that for evangelical Christians in North America, for people from other faiths and other parts of the world, to show you the way of God more perfectly. That is what this video is all about. Sabbath keeping is about grace, and growth in grace is what I want to share with you today. It's a big deal. It's a massive change. Only by faith can it happen. Only by faith can you truly keep the Sabbath.